So the other thing I wanted to talk about before we move on from non-league football is we do talk about. I mean, sometimes I think we're a bit guilty of this podcast becoming the table or accountancy podcast, but we do talk about money in football quite a lot, and we tend to focus on the Prem and the big hitters in there and their mega rich owners. But there is a story here, isn't there? And it is in many ways a more treacherous story about massive investment in non-league clubs and that. I mean, we've seen that play out at Billericay, and I mean, actually, it's not adversely affected Billericay as badly as I think it could have done. But I wanted to just touch on that to see what your thoughts were on these kind of clubs that become mega rich, comparatively compared to their peers overnight. Do you think there's enough regulation there? Is it as safe as it should be? Do they have the same tests that that whole like fit and proper owner test? Do they have to do that outside the football league? I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think the short answer to that is no. There's not a great deal of regulation when it comes to non-league football. There's no financial fair play, so you can pretty much spend what you want, leading to massive imbalance in what some of the lower teams are playing, what some of the higher teams in the league are playing. So if you take Billericay as the example, so in 2017, Glenn Tamplin comes in, decides that he wants to start throwing money at the club, and in doing so, he builds a stadium on top of the existing one. Absolutely fantastic. 3,500 capacity stadium. Levels our pitch somewhat, although somehow forgetting to do the drainage as well as it should have been done, which gets sorted later on. But it means that we have a very boggy pitch still when it comes into the winter months. But also goes crazy in his signings. So overnight, Billericay Town signed Jermaine Pennant, Jamie O'Hara, Paul Konchesky, a whole host of other ex-Premier League players. Jezza from YouTube, the guy that does all the skills. Forgive me, I can't remember which YouTube channel he's on.
F4, is it F or something? F something?
Is it F2?
Yeah. F2 maybe, yeah.
Yeah. So he signs and cameos in a couple of FA Cup games, but you're getting to a point where, at the time, again, we were still at that point, step 7. As a step 7 club, you're spending anywhere between, again, this is allegedly, because we don't have access to club accounts, but allegedly between £30,000 and £50,000 a week on a club that isn't getting even anywhere close to 2,000 people through the door, which is crazy. It's crazy money. Glenn, look, we could talk about Glenn Tamplin forever. Some of the stories behind Glenn are absolutely crazy. So rather than go on the potentially untrue or maybe litigation it may be involved, I'm going to stay well away from that. I will say Glenn eventually decided to leave the club. We weren't in the best financial position when Glenn left, and I think Billericay still has a lot of debt from when Glenn was with the club. However, we're still surviving, we're still good. I think the way you look at it is, when you have a money man come in, it's particularly at non-league level, there aren't the checks and balances to make sure that person is fit for a role. I think as well that what has been proven, not just with Billericay but with other clubs as well, is that the people that come in and do that sort of thing can be very, very fickle. And what we would consider to be a part of our community and a real part of our lives, to them is just a bit of fun. And if it goes down the drain, well, it's no big deal. I'll just move on to the next thing. Whereas for the people that are left behind to clear up the mess and to struggle and to try and keep the club going, or maybe even fold the club and have to start all over again, it can be absolutely devastating. And unfortunately, after Glenn had left Billericay, he decided to try and do the same thing with Romford, and it absolutely backfired. And he left Romford in a riot state. So that's a version of it being done very poorly. Whereas you have people like Mark White, who he is the manager and owner of Dorking. So Mark's taken a club which he created with a bunch of his friends in 1999. In 24 years, he's taken them 12 or 13 promotions up to the National League. They're currently sitting in the National League South. But again, he's done a very similar thing to Glenn in that I want to be the manager and I'm going to do this myself, which I would suggest probably doesn't work very well, but it seems to work for Mark okay. But he has used his finances to get the club into a position that they probably wouldn't be or they definitely wouldn't be if he hadn't done that. And a final example of one that's happening at the moment is Bedford Football Club. So Bedford were purchased by I think it's a Bitcoin, someone with something to do with Bitcoin, and he's somehow received £4.5 million of investment, and they're now Real Bedford in the South Central One. But they are top of the South Central One. I would not be surprised to see them in the one of the South Central top divisions next year. And I honestly don't think it will be long before they're in the National League North. And it will just be interesting to see how that works. I guess a question off the back of that is, do you necessarily think that something like that is, I don't know if fair is the right word, but is it in the spirit of the football or the football league or the football pyramid that we want to see, or is it something that, especially at that lower level, do you think it's not really what should be part of the game?
I think Tris might have an opinion.
I'm staying silent on this, completely silent, given the whole Leicester thing. And
yeah. I think the answer is no. Go on, Ollie.
I was going to say, talking about Everton, Margate are actually obviously financially different stratospheres, but are going through a similar problem as Everton have in the past, in the sense that we've got an owner who is Russian. Not many people realise it because it's not well publicised. Not many people publicise these things about non-league clubs, but he took over the club. He's a property magnate. He owns a lot of property in Margate, and he saw an opportunity to develop the stadium and make money. So he bought the club and subsequently has not invested in the club, saddled the club with debt because not through sort of mismanagement, but he's owned the club through the COVID period, which was devastating for non-league football clubs. And some of them have managed to survive it, and some are absolutely riddled with debt as a result. But he is potentially under sanction, so he can't continue to invest into Margate. So he's trying to sell the club. So we're caught in this position where a previous sort of a local, fairly wealthy guy is trying to buy the club back, but football's moved on, and to buy a non-league club now is not a quid and take over the £10,000 debt that it might have been 20 or 30 years ago. These are businesses that people want to sell for £1 million. And when we come back to the community spirit side of things, we're talking about, this Russian owner wants £1 million to write off the liabilities that he's due, for example, and sort of get a clear break from it. And we're busy trying to work out whether they're going to put the price of a pint up, and the small things in the club, and it's not small fry anymore. Although we see it as small, these people want their investment back, and if they don't, they tend to draw the club across the coals. And I remember as a kid playing Football Manager, and you'd go with Rushden and Diamonds because they were the richest team. They had all the money, and where are they now? They didn't last very long.
Yeah,
and it's happened way too many times.
I had no idea that they'd disappeared actually until it came up on a TikTok I watched about clubs that used to exist and had gone under, and they were one of them. And I was, that was always such I always remember them because they had a very unique name. But that's the risk, isn't it? Like for me, it's not. It's almost like the question is probably not framed right. It's not whether it's fair. It's whether it's right, I guess. And the risk of community assets like this going under on the whim of a bit of a millionaire, it just doesn't sit well for me.
You talk about accounting. Most owners get into football because they can write off the losses.
Yes.
And ultimately, they're not in it for the right reasons. They're in it, like Dan said, because it's a bit of fun, not because they love the club. It's something that they can write off their profits on, mess about with, and then drop like a stone. Whereas, people are left picking up the pieces. And there's community clubs out there. Is that the future? Hopefully, in terms of community ownership. So you've got teams like Lewis that are community led. Ebbsfleet are somewhat a success story around community ownership. But there are stories of really positive ownership situations, like is it Falkirk in Scotland, where that Euro Millions winner took over the club, put it back into trust for the fans, gave it huge amounts of money, made sure that the club was financially secure, but didn't take ownership of it. And if you get a situation like that, it's fantastic for your community because it still stays with its community spirit and it removes that financial burden. So that's good. That's people doing good in football, but the problem is most people aren't doing it for the right reasons, are they? So it doesn't feel fair, but all the time you can write off the losses. People are going to play around with these toys that are available to them,
and that's the problem, isn't it? That football these days is a business. It's not about the winning or the losing. It's about making money.
I wonder if there's merit in is it the Germans that have the 50+1 rule for all of their, and I don't know how far down the leagues that goes, but that I think was brought in so that the fans would always have the controlling interest in any situation. So the fans have to own 51% of the club, I think. So it potentially, I don't know how it works because you still get mega rich ones like Bayern Munich who still seem to be able to, win every year. But I don't know whether that's something.
The premise of that came from the fact that every Bundesliga team was basically born off the back of a business or a community. Yeah. So every club had a business that was supporting them, and it was the workers. So Bayer Leverkusen was the biopharmaceutical company. But the problem, I see a problem there in the fact that the Bundesliga have already started relaxing the rules. So everyone looks at the 50+1 rule and goes, this is the golden ticket for football. But teams like Hoffenheim aren't subject to the 50+1 rule. RB Leipzig are not subject to the 50+1 rule. So these clubs, they've got special dispensation because they've got a multi-millionaire. So they're at serious risk of failing, but the rest of the clubs are subscribed to it to a certain degree. So it's a potentially quite dangerous in the fact that they've got a two-tier system, in the fact that if you're rich enough, you can be absolved from the rules, a bit like Man City are trying to do at the moment.
Yeah, these rules are for everyone unless you have the money, in which case, go for it.
Yeah,
a bit like Animal Farm and the pigs.
Yeah, everyone's equal.
Yeah,
some people are more equal than others. Yeah.
But no, just to close off on that, I think as long as the club can be left in a state, if the person has finished and they've okay, I'm going to drop this club now. As long as the clubs can be left in a state where they're still able to run and it's not been decimated, the club can continue in where it is, then I'm happy with these people doing what they want to do. it's not the end of the world. Yes, it is only football at the end of the day. It means a lot to us, but it is only football. However, if it's getting to a place where it's affecting people's lives and their jobs, etc., then it's just not on. And Bitterroot are lucky that the people that took over from Glenn, the consortium, that really got their head on their shoulders. They're very much into community, being a community club, doing things from youth upwards, allowing people to use the pitch wherever. So, yeah, I guess it's an okay thing as long as it doesn't result, and which unfortunately it does sometimes, in people being affected.